Welcome to the Soft Life with Saddie Baddies. Saddie Baddies is the antidote to mental health stigma, and this podcast is hosted by yours truly, Priscilla O. Agyeman. We are a virtual sanctuary centering Black and multiracial people, and we prioritize the mental and emotional nourishment that is the foundation of collective healing in our communities. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Saddie Baddies podcast. Welcome to our very first episode. I'm your host, Priscilla Agyeman, and I am the founder of Saddie Baddies, which is a community, a virtual community, and a virtual sanctuary that is designed for people of color to remove the stigma surrounding mental health and initiate collective healing. So today's episode is all about the origin story of Saddie Baddies. You'll also learn a little bit about me and my upbringing and the reason why I started this space, which is such a huge part of my purpose in life. And I'm really grateful to be sitting down here with you today. I hope that you have your cup of tea, your matcha, your coffee. I hope that you're relaxing, and let's get into it. So how did Saddie Baddies start? That is one of my most frequently asked questions, and Saddie Baddies started because I needed Saddie Baddies. I started Saddie Baddies 3 years ago at a time in my life where I was working a dead end job, and it was really getting to me. And if you know what it feels like to work a dead end job, you know how much it affects and impacts your mental health. But backtracking a little bit, I'll explain why this even came about and how I found myself stuck in this scenario. And it really starts with my personality. And I have said this time and time again, I am a recovering people pleaser and I'm a recovering perfectionist. So with that being said, just keep in mind that I am someone that is still working quite hard to, not be so hard on myself. And being a recovering people pleaser and being a recovering perfectionist impacted my mental health more than I even knew. And I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey in the 90s. I'm first generation American. My parents are from Ghana. So my upbringing living in the suburbs was a little bit different than my peers because even though I was American, I still felt very much other. My culture is very rich and very vibrant and it's beautiful. However, I didn't have friends that had the same cultural identity as I did. So I did feel very strange growing up and having these rich stories about my heritage and my culture as a Ghanaian. However, feeling like I had to fit in and be this American girl, and essentially went through like a whitewashing phase. And I think in retrospect, that contributed to a lot of my perfectionism because when you're forcing yourself to fit into spaces that you naturally don't belong in, it is very frustrating. And now as an adult, I can look back and see that at that time, that's the only way I knew how to deal with not feeling accepted and not feeling like I fit in. However, it's okay. It's okay to be different. It's okay to not have the same last name as anyone in your class. That was definitely the case for me. And, I think one of my strengths was my academic performance, and I learned that if I could do well in school, I could be a high achieving student. And that's really what drove me to be even more of a perfectionist when I was younger. I strived to do exceptionally well in school, and I did do really well in school. So academics were a huge part of my identity. And when you are only one of like 3 Black kids in your class and you have a class of 25 students, you are going to feel like you have to perform at this exponential level. And I was so hard on myself to maintain that type of performance even throughout college. And so fast forward to college, I went to college in New York. And so I moved from my hometown of New Jersey and I moved to New York City, and it was life-changing. New York changes you, and anyone who lives in New York and has lived here for as long as I have, which is just over a decade, you know how much New York forces you to strip down these identities and truly find yourself. And that's exactly what happened to me when I moved to New York at the age of 18. So I moved to New York. I, had my group of friends in college. I did the whole college thing, all of that. But again, I still felt very much other. I didn't really know who I was. I didn't feel like I was being true to myself. And I didn't even know what my own hobbies were. I didn't know what I liked to do outside of just studying and trying to succeed, essentially. Obviously, I had some interests, but I didn't really hone in on any of those interests because I was so hyper focused on just doing well in school. So throughout college, I realized that I was dealing with pretty severe anxiety. At the time, I didn't even have the language to describe or explain what I was actually going through, but I just felt this enormous amount of pressure and stress, especially when it was related to my academics. So if I had a big test coming up, I would freak out, I would panic, I wouldn't sleep. I was having digestional issues. So these are all like telltale signs of anxiety. And I actually had my first panic attack in college, my sophomore year of college. And watching my body go through that panic attack and the way that I was so exhausted afterwards was just a sign that I didn't even know how to cope with that type of nervous system like response. My nervous system was on 1,000 because I didn't know what self-care was. There was not a self-care plan for me in place. And I think it's sad that so many college students, like myself at the time, were suffering from anxiety and bouts of depression as well. And we didn't even know what to call it. We're just like, well, this is college. It's supposed to be hard, right? So it wasn't until I started experiencing panic attacks like more frequently that I realized that I might have an issue with anxiety. And I went to grad school. I started graduate school and I wanted to pursue my master's in public health. So this was my intro into going to therapy for the very first time. So starting grad school, I went through a lot of different changes at the same time. I was like, okay, I'm in this program. I'm going to a really good grad school program. I went to a really competitive grad school. And however, I still felt like I wasn't enough because I kept connecting my identity with my academic career, my academic performance. And for a Black woman to be in these spaces again and not seeing a lot of people that look like you, not having any professors that look like you, it just started to get to me. And not only that, I had moved back from New Jersey to New York again. So I was living in New York City again, but this time as an adult, this time not as a college student with a meal plan and like a lanyard around my neck and everything taken care of. This time I was in New York as a 22-year-old adult with no job and just straight up student loans, which is another reason I was getting stressed out because financially I was not at a place to really fully support myself in the way that I needed to. So that added an additional level of stress. And then to top it all off, I was also in a place in my life where I was trying to figure out like, who am I? Who am I really? What do I like to do? Who are the people that I want to surround myself with? And I just kept falling short with those answers. And I was also dating at the time and feeling very disappointed by my dating life. It just was underwhelming to me, and disappointing is the best way I can explain it. I hit a very low point, and that is when I experienced my first depressive episode in grad school. So what I now know is a depressive episode. At the time, I just thought I was really, really sad and losing my mind. But looking back, I can now recognize that I was showing signs of depression. And I know that because I was not eating full meals at all. I was in my bed the whole day. I was crying a lot. I was feeling hopeless. I wasn't responding to any phone calls or texts from my friends, which is also very unusual for me. So, looking back, I wish I'd been able to give myself a little bit more grace because I didn't even know what I was going through at the time. However, one thing I am grateful for is that my graduate school program did offer mental health services to all students. So even though I was super embarrassed about going and putting my name down on the list and emailing the therapist to make an appointment, I'm really grateful that I did, because I wouldn't be sitting here today if I never took that step. So I went to see my therapist for the very first time, and my first session was super, super awkward because I didn't know what to talk about, and I was gaslighting myself out of even going. I was like, well, it can't be that bad because I'm not suicidal. So, I feel like I'm taking up someone else's appointment, and I don't really need to be here. I don't deserve to be here. And that type of self-sacrificing behavior is so detrimental, because what you end up doing is suffering regardless. So whether you're suffering more or less than you think you should, the fact that I didn't even see myself as worthy of help really showed how much work I actually needed to do inside. And I'm really glad that I took on that first session, even though it was very uncomfortable. And the therapist was just very quiet and just listening to me. And I wasn't used to people just listening to me without me having to be the one to offer advice, because in my group of friends at that time, I was the strong friend. I was the friend that other people were coming to for advice. And so for me to be, in the reverse, was just it was uncomfortable. So I didn't really know how to hold space for myself. I didn't know how to allow other people to hold space for me. So fast forward, I did graduate. I was in therapy the entire time that I was in graduate school, and beyond that. So I started my first job, and this was right around the time that I graduated. I ended up with a dead-end job. I ended up with a job that I hated, honestly. And even though it was a starting point for me, it was such an environment that was debilitating to my growth. It was debilitating to my confidence as a professional. And it really challenged me in ways that became unhealthy. And it didn't pay well, at all. So that was just the cherry on top. I was like, I have this stressful ass job and I'm not even getting paid shit for it, essentially. So that point, that was my next low point of having this master's degree, also having a lot of accomplishments in my academic career in graduate school and finishing school. So because school was my identity for these formative years of my 20s, and now I was finally done with school, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was supposed to be. So that's why this turning point of starting a job and just being a person with a job and not being this great student affected me so much. So when I was at this job and I realized how detached I was from my identity and my purpose in life, I had this calling, and that's the only way I can describe it. Saddie Baddies was a calling. It felt like an urgency that was in my spirit, and I really believe that that was God's way of telling me, this is what you are meant to do. You are not just somebody that is going to be so attached to your identity of your academic career. You're going to talk about your highs and your lows, and this is how you're going to do it. And I had a calling to start Saddie Baddies because I knew I was not the only person that was struggling with my mental health. I was embarrassed to talk about therapy to my friends and my family, but later on, when I started opening up, other people were interested in, oh, how was your first therapy session? What do you talk about there? How do you find a therapist? And I was like, you know what? If I'm over here struggling, and I'm over here, not struggling, but I'm over here trying to unpack and trying to heal from these issues that I've been carrying and this trauma that I've been carrying my whole life, I'm sure that there's other people that need that space too. And even if it's virtual, it's still a space. So in January 2019, I finally graduated with my master's degree. And then in March 2019 is when I started Saddie Baddies. And I did not have a business plan. I did not have any type of concept of social media management or social media strategy. I was literally at my desk at this dead end job, and I just started the page. I just literally created a handle, and I was like, this is going to be something one day. I don't know what it is, but that's what it's going to be. And that all stemmed from me taking a risk. And I was someone who didn't really like to take risks because I struggled with control, and I didn't like to do things outside of my comfort zone, because if I fail, that failure equals being a bad person, So I pushed myself to take this risk without having any prior knowledge of what I was actually going to be and what I was actually going to do. And I am so grateful that I listened to that voice. So what is the purpose of Saddie Baddies? The whole purpose of Saddie Baddies is to remind people that they are not alone, that healing is tangible and life does get better over time. And in order to truly have collective healing for Black people and people of color, we have to be comfortable talking about issues and topics that are uncomfortable for us. And mental health is so stigmatized. When I started Saddie Baddies, there was not a lot of spaces in real life or in person that really embrace the whole spectrum of mental health. A lot of it was a focus on toxic positivity and, write down your affirmations every single day, even if you feel like shit, or drink this celery juice and you'll feel great. And, I didn't really see any spaces that were really trying to unpack the layers of mental health. And nobody was talking about depression. Nobody was talking about bipolar disorder. People weren't talking about sexual trauma. People weren't talking about, things that are really heavy. And I think it's because these conversations and these topics are uncomfortable. So people don't want to talk about things that are uncomfortable. However, if you can't even speak about it, how can you heal from it? So removing the stigma around mental health is my calling. And that is the whole point of Saddie Baddies, because in community and in as a collective, when we can hold space for each other and we can talk about things that are uncomfortable, we are inherently, that is generational healing. And if generational trauma can be passed down, so can generational healing. And by talking about these topics and offering resources, which we do on Saddie Baddies, this is one way. This is just one of many ways that we can, as a collective, move towards collective healing. And now I see so many other, spaces and pages that are openly talking about mental health, which is great. At the time when I started Saddie Baddies, I didn't see a lot of those spaces at all, but I think people are definitely more open to talking about mental health, especially with the weight of the pandemic still weighing on us. So one thing I want to talk about is the ugly side of mental health. And this also ties into the reason why I started Saddie Baddies, because as I mentioned, I was seeing a lot of toxic positivity on social media. And, if somebody is dealing with, something like depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder or other mental health issues that need to be treated or can be treated with the help of therapy, medication, counseling, and also somatic healing as well, there was very little room to talk about the ugly side of mental health. The side of mental health where you cannot get out of bed and you haven't showered in days, and losing family and friends to mental health within the last 2 years. So many of us have lost people that we love. We have lost our sense of security. We have lost our sense of safety, myself included. And having to grieve the 2 years that we could have had but didn't have because of this pandemic, and having space for that is so important, because what happens is people just move on or pretend like nothing's wrong. And then you start to feel crazy for feeling heavy or feeling sad or feeling unmotivated. If you don't feel motivated or you haven't felt motivated for the last 2 years, you are not alone and there's nothing wrong with you. That just means that this pandemic has caused so much overwhelm and stress and sadness that you've lost touch with who you are. And so many of us have felt like that. So I am proud that Saddie Baddies is a space where people truly can be themselves, and you don't have to be that picture perfect person on Instagram. So many people on Saddie Baddies have shared things that they haven't shared on their personal Instagram because they know it's a non-judgmental space and they know it's a safe space. And same thing with our healing circles and events that we've had. People have been vulnerable and honest, and they've made connections, they've made friends, they've started therapy. So I am so proud of the vibrant and beautiful community that is Saddie Baddies, and I'm just really grateful to be doing this work. I think it is my life's work, and I feel most at ease when I am working for Saddie Baddies and when I'm doing this work. So what can we do, moving forward? What is it that we can do as a collective, as individuals, as a community, and in order to, continue healing and continue having conversations about mental health? So the first thing you can do is to be honest with yourself and with others about where you are mentally and emotionally. If you pretend like everything is okay, people will assume that everything is okay. So when you are honest about how you're feeling and how the people around you are feeling, you can not only be there for each other, it removes this pressure to be perfect. So removing that pressure from ourselves can really open up the door so that we can access the healing that we need. And another important aspect of being honest is also to not judge yourself and removing that judgment that often prevents us from seeking help. And help can look different for each person. Maybe help for you is taking a walk and going outside every single day and walking your dog. And maybe that is a therapeutic experience for you. For some people, it's therapy and seeing their therapist every week or every other week or whatever the cadence is. For some people, healing is therapy and medication. For some people, it's having a leave of absence from their job or from school so that they can actually get the help and support that they need medically. And whatever those tools look like for you, utilizing these tools is essential in our healing process. And on the Saddie Baddies website, which is www.saddiebaddies.com, we have a laundry list of resources and therapy directories and guides and a depression guide as well. And in our newsletter, our monthly newsletter, we do share a self-care guide. So be on the lookout for that if you're interested in more tools. And again, joining communities like this one that are designed to support and encourage healing for Black and multiracial people, that is one way that you can continue doing this work and continue supporting people that are doing this work. And so all things mental and emotional health and lived experiences as people of color. And we're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking about work-life balance, pursuing your passion, dealing with imposter syndrome, all the things. So please stay tuned for that. And thank you for listening and thank you for being here. To stay connected, join Saddie Baddies on Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, and more, and sign up for our monthly newsletter on SaddieBaddies.com to stay in the loop. Sending you hella love and stay soft, baddie.